Greetings, everyone. This is LT Kelser from the Cardboard Barracks. I'm here to talk to you about an interesting trend that has been happening in MMOs recently, and it's this idea of replayability. Uh, Today, it seems that MMOs don't really go for, giving us content at endgame when you hit the level cap. They have this idea that in order to make their game last, they need to make it replayable, which is a very bad thing for an MMO. The most recent offenders of this would be SWTOR and Guild Wars 2. Starting with SWTOR, there is an entire mechanic in the game devoted to the idea that once you make a character and get them to level cap, you are supposed to start over, make a new character, and level them up so you get these perks and rewards for all your other characters. It's called the legacy system. Um, Guild Wars 2's mechanic is that in order to get all the achievements for the game, you have to make at least two other characters to join the two other main factions of the game. Now, this, I personally believe, is a very bad decision on developers' parts for these games, for the main reason that they always tell you that when you make a character, it's your story to the game. Especially SWTOR, this is your story. Guild Wars 2, this is your story. The problem is that once you beat that story, well, then that character doesn't have a story anymore. It's not your story. It's just done. So they expect you to remake a character to get the other story. And the problem with this is that you go through the same areas of the game, see the same things, just in a different context. And to most players, and I'm included in that, that's not okay. I think the reason that, take World of Warcraft for instance, why it's been so successful is that it doesn't have this mentality that you need to make alts to have the game last as long as it has. When you make your main character in World of Warcraft, you get him to level cap, and you have a bunch of things to do, especially now that the most recent expansion, Mists of Pandaria, has come out. You have raids, you have dailies, PvP, dungeons. I mean, you can make an alt if you want, but you're not forced to. Whereas in SWTOR and Guild Wars 2, it feels that you're almost forced to do it. I think the issue is that people are getting the concept of replayability mixed up with longevity. Developers shouldn't be putting in so much effort into creating these beautiful, massive worlds with huge, sweeping stories. And I think that they're worried that players aren't gonna see all of it. They're like, oh well, we made, for SWTOR for instance, we have 8 classes in the game, each with their own unique storylines. And if we don't make players want to go back and play them, they're gonna miss all this content. But it's okay for players to miss that content. Like, players should not be able to see all the content that's in a game. That's just the nature of MMOs. There's stuff that you are not going to be able to do unless you make an alt. And for players who don't want to level up alts, then that's fine. Then they shouldn't be able to see that content. If I made a Jedi Knight on SWTOR and I leveled him to level cap, and I didn't play any other class in that game, and everyone's telling me, oh, the Sith Warrior and the Smuggler and all these other character storylines are so great, and I would have no idea, and I just had no intention of going and finding out because I've become so attached to my Jedi Knight. That's the other thing, is that we get attached to these characters that we spent hours and days and weeks and months leveling up, gearing up, just building these great stories and having a connection with them, and then the developers are like, all right, you're done with that, make a new one. And it's almost insulting for the player to just give all that up. There really isn't a good way to change this unless, we tell the developers that this is a bad idea. I mean, Guild Wars 2 doesn't even have really any endgame content. Once you hit level cap, finish your story, you can just do dungeons again or finish all the areas, but there isn't a thing as a raid. There isn't heroic dungeons. There's nothing for the level 80s to do that's strictly for level 80s. SWTOR has it a little better. They do have raids and endgame content, just not as much. People would go to World of Warcraft and saying that it has the best endgame content, it has the most to do, but I would respectfully disagree. And I've played World of Warcraft for 6 years now, so don't take this lightly. I personally think that Rift has the best endgame content. They come out with huge patch updates very quickly, and they have so many raids in the game, and they're all fantastic. I would even put some of them as a higher status than WoW, just because of the way they look, and they're so interesting. And I also personally think that Rift has been so underrated as a serious competitor for big MMOs. You know, everyone says, "Oh, it has to be this huge company, and they have to have this big name," but they don't. But you know, the state of endgame content and game and MMOs these days is just almost appalling. Like, we have World of Warcraft and Rift that does it really well, and SWTOR and Guild Wars that does it very mediocre. And the only way to really fix this is get out is just to tell the developers and on their forums and be like, hey, we like our characters, we should stick with them and carry them to the end game and just stick with one. And I know that's not for everybody. I know there's always going to be alts. There's always going to be people that love leveling alts, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But MMOs, they shouldn't focus around that idea that people need to make alts to make their game last, because they don't. If their game is good, it will be around for years to come, like World of Warcraft or EverQuest 2. I mean, they've been around for years, and they've had no issues without having force you to make alts. So that's all I have to say for today. Next week, we're going to start getting into the goods and bads of all major MMOs, and I'll see you guys next week.